This video is brought to you by True Tales of Buried Treasure, the largest collection of old treasure magazines in the West. On our website, you can search for individual treasure stories by region, or buy our original magazines themselves. To pay us a visit, please click on the link in the description. Enjoy. Oregon's rich earth has yielded gold worth millions of dollars. From the gold fields around Jacksonville in the southwest to the Blue Mountains in the northeast, people have mined riches from placer mines. Old, rotting log cabins, rusty dredges, and huge piles of river gravel from Chinese hydraulic mining are evidence of the time and effort spent searching for and finding gold. Some families still enjoy weekend outings to pan or sluice for gold. For each operating mine in Oregon, there seem to be at least 2 legends of lost mines that were supposedly even richer. Stories like the Four Dutchmen, the Lost Forest, the Log Cabins, and the Lost Shepherd are often repeated. But of all the lost mine legends in Oregon, the tale of the Blue Bucket Mine is the most famous, sometimes called the Lost Emigrant, the Lost Wagon Train, or the Meek Cutoff Mine. This story of finding gold while being lost in Oregon's high desert has captured many imaginations. The circumstances of the find, along with the mystery of its location, have kept this legend alive. One version of the story involves a little girl playing in a creek near a lost wagon train in the desert. She put a bunch of yellow rocks from the creek into a blue sand bucket. Much later, and many miles away, it was discovered that the yellow rocks were actually gold. Numerous attempts to retrace the wagon train's path and find the mine have failed, and its location remains a mystery. This isn't surprising considering the time that passed between finding the yellow rocks and realizing they were gold. Memories had dulled, and the people of the train had endured many hardships, including alkali poisoning from drinking bad water. Organized searches for the mine were delayed by bloody Indian wars, and by the time it was safe to look, even the most reliable men from the train couldn't retrace their steps through the monotonous landscape. There are at least 100 versions of this legend. Some tales are pure fabrication, while others are only partly fictional. So many words have been written about this one mine that separating fact from fiction is extremely difficult. However, 2 facts are indisputable. A wagon train was lost for almost 6 weeks in eastern Oregon, and gold was found by someone on the train. The exact location of this mine and the richness of the ore remain a mystery. By carefully sorting through the facts and eliminating some fiction, the location of the find can be narrowed down to a general area. The story of the lost wagon train of 1845 started much earlier, but the legend of the Blue Bucket Mine began at Fort Boise, Idaho, in August of that year. A wagon train of 800 men, women, and children from 5 trains combined for safety on the trip from the east. This train left Fort Boise for the Willamette Valley of Oregon, with around 200 wagons and several hundred head of loose stock. The controversial guide for the wagon train was Steve Meek, brother of the famous Joe Meek. Steve claimed he had trapped in the Blue Mountains of eastern Oregon and knew a faster trail than the regular Oregon Trail to the north. Tired after months on the trail and dreading the long, hard journey over the mountain passes to the north, most of the wagon masters listened to Meek. However, about 90 wagons disagreed and stuck to the well-traveled trail. After crossing the Snake River, the train started up the Malheur River, but within a few days of leaving the known route, Steve Meek was hopelessly lost. For 6 weeks, the wagon train wandered through eastern Oregon. By the time the exhausted group reached the Columbia River at the Dalles, 20 people had died, and at least 20 others were so weak they died soon after. During those 6 weeks and along their meandering path, someone from the train picked up a few yellow rocks, sparking the legend of the Blue Bucket Mine. It's often said that some of these rocks were beaten out on wagon wheels and used as fishing line sinkers, but it wasn't until 1849, when men began returning from the California gold rush, that they discovered the rocks were actually gold. Serious efforts to find the lost mine didn't begin until the 1860s. In 1859, a member of a party surveying a road across eastern Oregon reported finding gold on the east slopes of the Blue Mountains in the Malheur River drainage. This reignited interest in gold, and at least 3 parties left the Willamette Valley for the Blue Mountains in 1860 and 1861. However, these groups were prospecting for gold rather than searching for the lost mine. A focused search didn't start until 1864, when Dr. E.H. Bruni left Portland, Oregon with a party of men. Using a diary kept by Mrs. Hamilton of the Tethero train, Dr. Bruni traced the route of the lost wagon train for days, looking for the Meek cutoff mine, or as he called it, the gold the Meek party picked up and threw away. However, somewhere in the upper drainage of the South Fork of the Malheur River, Bruni's party was attacked by Native Americans and had to abandon the search. Other search parties left the Willamette Valley in the 1860s looking for the lost mine, but each was turned back by the threat of Native American attacks. Faced with these dangers, searchers soon lost interest in the legendary riches. In 1885, and published the first story referring to the lost mine as the Blue Bucket Mine. Although not very factual, this article triggered a flood of stories about the gold. Tales ranged from nuggets large enough to be used as doorstops to large blue buckets filled to overflowing with yellow rocks. One story focused on the Helm family, across the plains with the Tethero train, before joining the larger company. According to this tale, the Helm children played in a stream while their mother washed clothes, and one of the girls picked up gold nuggets and carried them around in a blue sand bucket. Many authorities on Oregon history believe this to be a fact. Fired up by these new stories, several people started hunting for the lost mine. However, the location of the riches remained a mystery. After the initial rush, interest waned somewhat, although some adventurous souls still pursue the lost mine to this day. Why the mystery of a lost wagon train? Even years later, level-headed men from the train should have been able to retrace the route. The answer lies in 3 written accounts of the journey. One is the narrative of Samuel Hancock. Another is a diary kept by a cattle drover named Jesse Herritt, which was published in the Oregon Historical Quarterly, and the third is the unpublished diary of Samuel Parker, the wagon master. All 3 accounts tell of confused, lost wanderings and incredible hardships among the travelers. Samuel Parker's diary gives the most accurate description of the trail, offering a day-by-day picture of broken wagons, lame livestock, death, heat, thirst, and other hardships. The other journals add a more vivid, personal touch to Parker's accuracy. On August 24, 1845, the wagon train left the well-traveled Oregon Trail and started up the Malheur River. Easygoing on the lower reaches initially added an eager, festive air to the company, but this soon shattered on the rocks of the upper river. For days, the company endured a nightmare trying to traverse the rocky terrain. Wagons splintered, animals became so footsore they refused to move, and people were worked and jolted into a state of exhaustion and illness. On September 5th, the train finally left the rocky area, crossing into an even worse nightmare, the Great Malheur Lake Basin. They wandered over the alkali plains, now called Crane Prairie, where thirst was a constant companion and many people fell sick from drinking alkali water. Almost certain disaster was averted by an all-night march from the desert to some sloughs on September 11th. These stagnant pools, referred to as the Stinking Hollows in emigrant journals, are thought to be near Christmas Valley, a short distance from the town of Silver Lake. However, the hollows couldn't provide enough water for the settlers and their animals, and the available graze was scarce and consisted mostly of tough salt grass. Scouting parties continued to search the surrounding country for water and grass. Finally, good news came back to the wagons. Another ordeal began as they struggled through soft pumice soils that dragged at the wagon wheels, with thick dust choking the already thirsty travelers and animals. On September 17th, after a night-long march, the train reached a spring believed to be in the headwaters of the Crooked River. For 2 more weeks, they toiled through the dry canyons, possibly wandering as far northwest as Fossil and crossing the John Day River twice. The prolonged shortage of water, dust, and other rigors of the trail began to take their toll. According to Samuel Parker's diary, 4 people died on September 23rd, 6 on the 24th, 3 more on the 25th, and another 5 on the last day of the month. On that last day of September, the company camped on the Crooked River near what is now Prineville. On October 2nd, they reached the Deschutes River, which they crossed with considerable difficulty. Finally, on October 7, 1845, the train reached the Dalles on the Columbia River. As noted in Mr. Parker's diary, words could not capture the full extent of the company's hardships. None of the diaries or narratives of the journey mention the yellow rocks, but this isn't surprising. It wasn't until 1849 that it was discovered that gold had been found by the emigrants. To the journalists, the yellow rocks were either curios or children's toys. After the first story about the Blue Bucket Mine appeared in the Oregonian in 1885, many other versions emerged. Several people who were on the trip or knew those on the train rushed to share their stories. W.J. Heron claimed that he and his sister, while hunting for water along a dry creek bed, came upon a pool where they found nuggets and put them in a blue bucket. Another story relates that a woman on the train picked up enough yellow rocks to fill a blue water bucket and carried them to the wagon in her apron. Yet another version claims that one of the wagon masters, Sol Tetherow, found the gold and placed it in a blue water bucket for safekeeping. There are as many locations mentioned as there are versions of the legend, including the Steens Mountains in southeast Oregon, the Warner Mountains near Lakeview, Hampton Butte near Hampton, Butte Creek near Fossil, Mountain Creek near Mitchell, and Tie Creek on the west side of the Deschutes River, among others. Although the legend of the Blue Bucket Mine has numerous variations, one detail consistently appears. The yellow rocks were found in the Malheur country, and the headstone of a woman's grave is said to be the gateway to the mine. As the legend goes, a woman named Chambers died shortly after the wagon train left the Snake River. She was buried beside the trail with a stone marker bearing her name. According to several members of the company, the gold was found within 1 or 2 days' travel of this grave. During the Chief Joseph Indian War in 1877, a scout for General Howard thought he had found the right grave. He later told Duncan Teeter, an old prospector, about its location. Teeter found the headstone without difficulty and prospected west from the site for months, but he never found the mine. Disheartened, he returned to the Willamette Valley to discuss the grave with members of the Meek train. The information he received from the emigrants convinced him it was not the correct grave. Teeter and the Army scout were not the first to visit the site. 2 Frenchmen prospecting in the area had stumbled upon the head marker. Remembering the legend of the Blue Bucket Mine, they began a search but were forced to flee by hostile Indians. Before leaving, they moved the grave marker several miles to confuse other searchers. During this same period, H.B. Reeves, a prominent Malheur rancher, started his own search for the mine. At the mouth of the North Fork of the Malheur River, he found a grave containing the bones of an immigrant. Believing it to be the Chambers grave, he searched west from that point. However, people from the Meek train disclaimed any knowledge of this grave, arguing that the wagon train had never gone that far north. This is substantiated by the Herritt Diary, which mentions the South Fork of the Malheur River. The mystery of the dead woman's grave wasn't solved. Walter Meekum, executive secretary of Old Oregon Trail Inc., discovered the grave of Mrs. Sarepta King Chambers in Agency Valley. The headstone was marked simply, Mrs. S. Chambers, 45. Historians found that Mrs. Chambers had been a member of the Meek train and had died on September 3, 1845. Using this grave as a starting point, searchers continued to hunt for the mine to the north and west in the headwaters of the Malheur. There are 2 facts to remember. Mrs. Chambers was buried in Agency Valley on September 3rd. On September 5th, the wagon train entered the alkali flats of Crane Prairie. This timeline doesn't allow for the wagons to have swung north and west and still reached Crane Prairie on the 5th. The train must have left Agency Valley traveling southwest, probably up Warm Springs Creek. Once on top, they likely turned just south of west along the divide separating the Malheur from the South Fork of the Malheur River. It's reasonable to assume that on the evenings of the 3rd and 4th, the travelers sought campsites with water, which would have required them to leave the top of the divide and drop down to streams starting just below the divide. Clark's Portland Bee story, published in 1869, places the mine near the headwaters of the Malheur, but just over the divide in a creek flowing southwest. If true, the train must have camped on the headwaters of Coleman Creek on the night of September 3rd. On the night of September 4th, either Coyote or Crane Creek could have been the campsite based on the possible distances traveled. From there, the train must have entered the alkali flats of Crane Prairie near the Crow Camp Ranch. The facts seem to support the existence of a rich mine, one well worth finding. It's also worth noting that the person who finds the Blue Bucket Mine will either be extremely lucky or will have spent hours separating fact from fiction in the volumes of written material. They will also have spent days on end in the intriguing high desert of Oregon, following the leads found in the written accounts. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to read the original article or purchase the magazine from which it was taken, please check out our website, truetalesofburiedtreasure.com.